was really unlikely, right, when I had only the prior probability. But now that I have all the posterior evidence, I think it's likely, right? But you have to overcome what you initially conceived of as its low prior probability, right? So it's if you have a low prior on something, it just means that you need more evidence in the posterior trials, right, in order for you to believe that thing. That's just kind of how that works.
And so here's my thing. Hold on, real quick. I'm sorry, I'm gonna look this real quick, and I'm gonna move on. But in your conversation, right? Hey, shut up. What I'm gonna say is, in your same conversation, you're basically being like, if we can show a short-term evidence, then it moves on to a long-term evidence, right? Okay, here's me being a black woman who is more conservative. Let's actually talk about it, right? If we're going to say that these things are just something that happens and then we move on, then that would mean that I actually have a better leg to stand on than you would. Because yes, you may have these conversations and can, move past and have people take up for you, but at the same time, it's just I know for a fact that I've been around people who do things and we fuck with each other, not because we are doing just shit. We are long-term evidence.
Yo, Nathan,
right?
Based on
hold on. Hey, shut the fuck up. We're long-term evidence, right? If you're going to say that, oh, well, this is a problem and let's resolve it.
He's talking about probabilities.
Hey,
hold on. I'm trying to be cool here. You know what a probability is? He's talking about
I do know
the concepts. Okay, cool. So think about it this way. Given the concepts at hand, right? There's going to be an assigned probability before you even examine the evidence on the table, right? An overly complex object has a lower probability of existing because all of these things about the object have to be true, right? And as you add those things that have to be true, the probability of it being true is less likely overall. Think about a math equation. The more premises it has, right, the more complex it is. Okay, cool. So,
hey, honestly, I feel like you want to pop your pussy, and that's cool. I love that for you. But if we're gonna actually talk about math, honestly, truly, I can actually talk about people in this room, right? I can.
No, that's your issue. You talk about people. You talk about people in your show.
I can be honestly, truly bad.
One second. That sounds nice, dude.
What the fuck was that?
That sounds good.
I love that pocket.
That was just a huge release. Y'all never had one of those? A relief?
I don't know what I'm talking about, so I just want to stop them talking.
Yeah, that was just, that was beautiful. So, Mills, I have a question for Mills.
Sure.
When it comes to, the probability. Now, I'm not a fucking genius. I'm going to just put that out there. I don't know shit about math when it comes to that. I don't know what the fuck you guys are talking about.
Quick, don't come from my bed.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say, when it comes to stepping outside and seeing how nature works and how we work with nature and how just the whole world works, do you think that could be accident or if that's on purpose? How we all, you know what I mean? I don't know if I'm explaining it correct.
I think you're making some sort of I don't know, inference, design inference or something.
Right. Yeah. Do you believe that the design of this?
Everything works so well together.
Exactly. Yeah. Do you think it could be accident or that's actual design, something greater than ourselves create?
Oh, I think it's most likely accident.
Okay.
Right. So so I think there's a ton of stuff if you look into it really closely, there's a ton of stuff that just doesn't make a ton of sense about how life works, right? There's a ton of things that are just just good enough to get by, right? Where they could have been a lot better. There's a ton of things that what's a good example? Oh, so there's a certain part of a giraffe in the giraffe's neck, right? That because of the way evolution worked, right? It was easier for evolution to create this I don't know, part in the neck by slowly adding inches or whatever onto it. But what it should have done, if you were to design a giraffe from the beginning, right? So what ends up happening is because of the way evolution works, right? You end up having this piece in the giraffe's neck that goes all the way from the top, where their brain is, and it goes down through the neck and then loops all the way back up again, right? And it's the most inefficient design you could ever imagine. No one who was designing a giraffe. Sorry.
No, where are the giraffes from? I'm just asking. I'm sorry.
So they just evolved from like common ancestors,
And what?
right? So there was something that was like a giraffe, giraffe giraffe.
I always wondered about certain like coincidences, right? When like we breathe CO2 and the trees around us. Hold on, about this. Like we breathe CO2 and the trees around us need that CO2 to carbon dioxide to thrive, to build. Certain things I've always thought can't just be happenstance or accidents. Like to the fact where the entire creation needs each other to survive in a way. It just seems too divine to really question.
Most people use it wrong, right? So when someone says things that came together randomly, it's not exactly how it works, because two hydrogens and an oxygen make water. There is no other random chemicals that can mix together to create water, so it's not a random thing.
But I don't think
It's not by accident.
they're not talking about that. Like they're not talking about the actual like.
No, we are talking about that because Black Americans think.
Yeah, not days.
Hold
Yo!
on,
I'm trying to help you, ho. I'm trying to help you.
Like, they're not talking about the fact that those things happen. They're talking about the laws that play. Like,
how did they come from?
Holy fuck.
Hold on, let me
Talking about,
go.
why is the case that the kind of what do you call it? The force of electron overpowers the kind of force of gravity, right? Like those things have to be true for you even to have chemistry function, right? And they're saying something like, well, it's not just the fact that those molecules make water. It's why do those molecules even have the relations they do? What grounds the kind of the labor for the actual laws?
Hold on, because also AWOC, what's crazy is that these things would be here even without our knowledge of it. That's what's amazing, is that even before we put the actual label of this is hydrogen, this is oxygen, this is it was already there before we even had that or put names on it or whatever. So that's
but that's
where,
just an epistemic fact, right?
But why are the?
It's the case that it's the case that I will go to work tomorrow, right? Even though I don't even need to think about it. I don't even have to know that for it to be true. It's just, but that's kind of how facts function. I think though, it's not a feature of intentionality or something. It's just how the subject works in regards to facts and its accessibility.
So I'm not sure what you're saying there, eh? So from what I see, they're not making the inference from the fundamental constants of the universe or such.
Yeah.
The building, they're not making that inference. They're making a more watchmaker. You know what I mean? You see a watch on a beat.
Like a fine tuning argument or something.
Not a fine tuning. I think they're making the design design right, and not a fine tuning. I think you're pulling them towards fine tuning, whereas I think they're really trying to make the watchmaker.
No, I think A was responding to the molecules or the water thing coming together, being the thing that
Hold on, I will
and he's
say.
saying the lack of random.
Pockets point.
He's saying the lack of randomness is besides
it was
the
my
point.
point of
No, they sucks. They're correct. Yeah. So Mike, the other thing I'm saying is that he was responding specifically to that, right? But I think what Pockets was trying to say is that it's curious how we breathe
Everything
in
works well
oxygen.
together.
Right, we breathe in oxygen. Right, it has nothing to do with covalent bonds between hydrogen and oxygen.
No,
right? It's
sure,
more to do with we breathe in oxygen and trees breathe in carbon dioxide. We exhale carbon dioxide and trees.
That would be the case regardless.
Trees breathe in carbon dioxide. So it's
that possible now?
Well, my point. Hold on, y'all. My point was to prove the existence of God, a higher power, something beyond understanding. How do these things fit and work so?
Yeah, no, we're kind of arguing about
without
what method you're doing that by, right? Under my impression, I was finding Tim, it was I don't think you're specifically saying that hydrogen is hydrogen because of whatever you're saying. I thought you were making a greater point about all this stuff has this kind of functionality to it, and why are they functional? And Milt's just saying it's more so an argument about intentionality being found in design.
Yeah.
More so than just
exactly.
Yeah. So he was right. I think I was maybe more contextualizing myself towards Tim and not kind of focusing on the overall argument. I apologize.
No, that's fine. That's why I asked Mel if he believes in accidents when it comes to science and nature and all that. Are there accidents or is everything designed?
Well, so that's the interesting thing, right? So it's kind of like both, right? So like the way people describe evolution, right, is like random mutation with non-random selection, right? So like how your genome mutates is completely random, right? You just get like random mutations, like sometimes when people are being birthed, right, and that like changes their morphology in some way or their like ability to do X, Y, or Z in some way to their capacities, right? So the mutation part is completely random, right? But then what randomly changed organisms end up surviving in a given like ecosystem is completely non-random because it has to do with which organism is the most fit for that ecosystem, right? So that's why it's non-random selection.
And one thing too, because I like that. I'm glad they used that word because a big misunderstanding too is the difference of when we say like survival of the fittest, or when someone mistakenly says survival of the strongest. In the evolutionary science, where fit just simply means able to reproduce at like a high level. So a lot of times we look at humans as fit, but so are flies, and so are a ton of other insects. So
I definitely feel
just
like
means fit for the ecosystem. And that can mean a whole bunch of different things.
I definitely feel like even T. Poppins, I lay down, girl. I definitely feel like when we have like the fittest, especially when we have like these conversations, like American conversations, like a lot of people will be like, oh, it's like you're Black American, you're this, you're that, like you're dark skinned, we don't even want you. I'd be like, why are you hoes on my ass? Leave me alone. You know what I'm saying? Like obviously, hey, you're the only one talking. You see how everybody else I be cool with? I apologize. I have no beef with them. You want that drama?
About that girl.
You see how he want that drama?
No, but
chill. I'm trying to chill because I fuck with y'all. I fuck with the rest of y'all. Y'all be cool. It's just these certain niggas. You say you don't fuck with me, and then I be making these white men beat you up. Is that what you want? And I hate to be that black woman. Like, they be making me feel bad. Like, now I'm a dark black skin woman making the white men beat this nigga up. Like, it makes me feel bad.
Dollface, I need you to just mute up. Save it for the night.
I'm a lock in.
Yes,
but I'm
saving it up. Listen to the convo. Alright.
I just don't like how certain people say certain things.
Baby girl.
Our chief doesn't condone said behavior.
I'm so sorry.
So was good because this is a good combo. Who was gonna? I think a couple people were trying to say something.
Yeah, because I'm trying to learn because like I said, I did not listen to Bill Nye back in the day. I was snoozing through the classes, so I'm trying to understand the science. Hold on. I was trying to understand the science aspect of proving whether or not God exists. Because I always thought it was a higher power, something we don't understand. There's some things we'll never understand, and that's what I always thought God was something beyond us. And I don't think we could ever put science to it.
Can I ask a question, Pocket?
No, you're absolutely right. Science doesn't determine whether or not God exists. God is like a metaphysical, quote unquote, like postulate, right? And science has nothing to say about metaphysical postulates, right? It can only tell us about like quote unquote physical things and how they interact. It can't tell us about like whether or not a God exists.
The other thing too is, sorry, on that.
No. Even why law is true, I think, right?
Right. The purpose is not something science tells. Is like it doesn't give meaning or purpose. It's kind of it just tries to break down at the highest capacity of evidence to.
Well, there's just certain things that are like outside the domain of science, right? So like, think about like whether or not it's right or just or moral to like kill someone, right? Like, there's no amount of science you can do there that's going to like actually decide that issue, right? That's an issue for like philosophy. And it's the same with like God, right? Science is just not the thing we're going to look to adjudicate whether or not a God exists. We're going to look to things like philosophical arguments.
No,
science can be that. I mean, when you talk about science, the first thing you do when you conceptualize God, you use reference points of what God may be. So even to think about like the concept of God, you are bringing into like the reality of the situation where you are then using these reference points, how you describe God, like maybe what God may look like, what God may do. All this is conceptualized by your own mind. So therefore, you can utilize science to just kind of like say, hey, God exists or not, right? So if you say you can't conceptualize God, then no one can actually know what God is, right? So how can you prove that at all? So therefore, the end result, the conclusion is you are agnostic. You don't know if God exists or not. But if you say there is a God and you listen to scripture or whatever religion is out there, then it has been conceptualized. It's descriptive at that point. So therefore, it's now brought into the reality of like existence. So then you can look at science to kind of like, you know, determine whether it is there or not, or even philosophy.
No, but that's like, that doesn't seem right to me, because like, think about it, like, God could exist, and we could just be like not able to conceptualize it, right? Like, those two things come completely apart. So like, our epistemic limits, right, as like, you know, biological beings that like aren't omniscient, aren't like, you know, omnipotent, but omnibenevolent, right, don't have any of the omnis, right? It might just be like impossible for us to like fathom like a true like a concept that actually maps on to like what God really is, right? Like we might just be like we might not have those types of senses kind of thing, right? Like we might just be like limited in that way.
Why do people like? Because I don't.
But it could still be true that God exists, even if we are limited in that way, right?
But why do people use like? And I've heard this. Hold on. I've used this like one. I've heard this like maybe once or twice. I don't know. But why do people use like the Big Bang Theory as a reason to prove?
Because they don't know what it is.
Well, no. I think so. Pockets like you can use scientific evidence to like support premises in philosophical arguments, right? So like people will make arguments like if the universe began to exist, the universe has a cause. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause, right? And then the people will say like that cause is God, right? So like
it has to be an uncause.
in order to support, yeah.
Yeah, well, it has to be uncause as well, right? Yeah, I was just adding that point because I think the important part of the premise is that like the cause has to be uncause, and that's how you get like the necessary.
Right.
But to specifically touch upon what you're saying, like at least with the
Well, I just want to
when they found out that the Big Bang Theory
I
was
just want to
what
like
it
land it,
was.
so it's
Yeah,
like
let you
middle
real
of the
quick,
starting point.
Let him cook, bro.
Yeah, so I just want to land it so it's very clear, and then I'll shut up once. So like in that argument I just gave you, right? Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause, and that cause is God, right? In the second premise, right, the universe began to exist, someone might bring up the Big Bang as evidence of that fact.
Does God exist?
But it's so the conclusion is God exists in that argument, right? But it's still a philosophical argument.
And even here's my thing, Mila. Even in that conversation, God does still exist. And I feel like that's why y'all.
Alright, I'm back.
Well, stop it. You just questioned Megan. Like, think about the kind of argument we're having.
No, let me finish the conversation. Let me finish my thing.
But that makes
You
like
don't
no,
want to
like,
let me finish.
you're not engaging.
You
And I'm trying to tell you why.
let me finish what he's saying.
Look,
Let me
look,
answer him.
either you let me explain it so like Nathan will just like.
Listen, you were talking to me.
You're not answering him.
You was
You're not
letting them
answering
be
him.
quiet. I want to answer him specifically.
You're not answering him.
I'm starting to enjoy
And I don't have to do that. Honestly,
Look.
I don't have to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't have to do that. I literally
Just
don't have to
listen
do that.
for- okay,
Like,
then
honestly,
don't
and
talk.
that's one of my favorite
Don't
things
speak.
about being
Don't
around the whole
just
ethnicity of
ignorant.
people. I don't have to
What
listen
do
to
you
you.
mean my people? I'm
I
black.
don't have
You
to
fucking
listen to you,
dick.
nigga. I don't have to listen to you.
So respectfully speaking, I think Dollface, this is speaking right after Miller. Even though it's a bad point, let's make
No,
let's
Nathan
let-
said no, like, no,
let's-
Nathan
let's-
said-
let's let
doing
him-
this
all night,
Yeah, Nathan said you have to be on topic, bro. Nathan said you have to be on topic.
Let's let the bad point come out, and then after the bad point, you can show
Oh my God, Nathan, this is why we have to deport all Mexicans, bro. I'm voting for Trump.
And honestly, truly, honestly, I love y'all because honestly, I think it's so funny because
You see
it's
why?
so crazy that. No, shut up. I'm only a little bit Mexican only because we used to be Blackfoot Indian, but they was yelling at us and they was like, y'all aren't Native American no more. you're Mexican. I was like, oh my gosh, what the fuck? I don't give a fuck. I don't give a fuck no more. Like, honestly, truly, I'm out here begging for time.
Alright.
It is
knowledge as well.
Can I count? Can we count that as your submission?
Someone just make a woman odd.
I didn't even finish my topic.
So I want to real quick too, because this is a subject I generally enjoy and read a lot on and watch a lot of stuff on. So a lot of times too, pockets, people misunderstand what science say what the Big Bang is.
No, don't stop coming at pockets because she was coming
I'm
at
just
it.
gonna move you down, Dollface. I'm just gonna move you down. There you go.
To the discussion of what, see, scientists wouldn't say really what started it. They don't really talk like that. But so a lot of people take the Big Bang as like that's when space and time started. So they think a mind had to start it. And some people even say a God could even have performed the Big Bang, which scientists does not say when the universe started, and have left it alone from there too.
Wait, Tim, what do you think the Big Bang is, bro?
It's the expansion. It's the early expansion of the universe.
Oh my God, man! Like, yeah, man, like your name is Tim, bro.
No, but
That's what the answer is. Yeah.
No, the stuff. What? It's the expansion. It only talks about the expansion of the universe, meaning that it expanded, not that it is the beginning.
Yeah,
Expansion.
it's as far back as we can go to where time conceptually started.
And then what happened is, so like this is when we get into like, can science prove it? Well, science can prove it because we can watch the radiation. We can watch the
cosmic
red light
microwave
shifts.
background.
Yeah, we can watch the red light shifts. So then when you talk about, so here's what the problem is. When you talk about philosophy, it turns into, well, what started it? And science doesn't really claim that. But what a religious person will say, or maybe a philosopher will say, is that there had to be a first cause. And I think a lot of people attribute that to the Big Bang, like God, that was it. But so that's where it gets confusing for religious people and scientists. It's like, that's not what science is saying, is exactly what,
There are some like philosophers or some like especially religious people who think that like there's good arguments for there having to be a first cause, but like I don't think that's the case.
Right.
I think it's like silly.
But you don't think there's any good arguments for that being a first cause, Millet?
Sorry, yeah, I think they're all really silly, the arguments for their like needing a first cause. Like they all depend on like very, very, very philosophically dubious type of like assumptions or premises, right? So like the type of like regressive Aristotelian first cause that argument that Tim was pointing out, right? Relies on something called like the principle of sufficient reason, right?
And what's wrong with that?
Well, nothing. But
like who dislikes? Like
many people.
There's arguments against that.
Yeah.
There's like the big conjunctive effect.
Yeah, exactly. PSR is like even like a weak PSR is like still too strong, right? Because like presumably a lot of people will know. I think like I think there can be proof facts, right? And if there's proof facts, then like those things don't need an explanation. So the PSR would just be false in a case like that. And I don't think there's any good arguments that are levied that like say like.
Think about that idea of classic God. It's like, yeah,
I guess I'm supposed to say the same thing.
I'm just thinking about, like, you could say God's necessary, but it's like, what explains the necessity? Like, is it a brute fact as well? Like, is it the bottom out as a necessity claim? There's no further necessity to explain this necessity? It just kind of gets weird, right? It seems like special pleading or something.
Hey, Walker.
Why aren't people better? Hold on, y'all.
Dollface, shut up.
My God, my bad.
Walker Miller.
Why aren't people better,
Someone says
right?
to me,
If someone says that
in the
you
general
want to live
terms, like God is outside of existence, my first thought is something outside of existence doesn't exist.
Yeah,
How do you feel about that?
why?
Existence is like the hardest thing to talk about.
Here's my thing, like,
But what do you
why
think about
are
that statement? Do
we
you
as
think I'm wrong
Americans?
right off the
No.
bat, or what would you say?
Dollface.
No.
Let me ask you this question. Why do you think you
Okay.
need to be heard?
I feel like, why are y'all having these conversations about
You say you don't know the answer. I'm just gonna move you down, man.
I'm saying, like, why are we as Americans having these conversations?
But why do you think you need to be heard? Why should we listen to you?
You don't have to listen to me.
I must say,
Okay, so I'm just move you down
for
there.
an hour, but I do enjoy that knowledge is gonna do what he typically does to me, to Nathan. And I'm here.
Yeah, I got a question for Tim. Tim, you're not one of the philosophers, so what does PSR mean? Something these philosophers.
I didn't understand the word you said. Say it again.
Yeah. What does PSR mean? This is a common philosophical term.
PSR?
Yeah.
I'm not a philosopher. I enjoy, I'm more of a science guy. I enjoy listening to philosophy, but I don't know what that term means. PSR, no.
You're good. Yeah. PSR is just a philosophical term for principle of sufficient reasoning.
Oh, I might have heard the term before, said like that. I don't know if I've heard
No, they don't speak like regular folks. That's what it is.
No,
Maybe that there should be like some kind of explanation to that thing.
In the context of what we were talking about, Tim, it just means that like everything has every effect has a cause, right? That's what like the PSR in the sense that we were talking about it, which is like what you need to like run the type of Aristotelian argument you were pointing at before, right? The like sort of like, you know, whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe begins to exist, so you know the universe has a cause. That causes
Whatever begins to exist.
So the opposite is, so if someone says uncaused cause, is that a rebuttal to what PSR is?
That'll be like
So
some
they're
specific word that
gaslighting you. So when they say PSR, they're gonna say their version of specific reasoning. They're gonna try to like say, oh, this is what I think.
Principle
reasoning.
Principle of sufficient reason.
Sufficient reason.
Sufficient reason, yeah. So like, so Tim, what you would want to say in that instance is you would want to say like, well, why can't I have grouped facts, right? Which is to say that like there could be something that comes into existence or starts existing, right, as like a fact or whatever that doesn't have like a completely 100% described like a cause, right? And that's like that type of thing in the philosophical literature would be considered like a brute fact. That is a fact that doesn't need an explanation. And if there is a fact that doesn't need an explanation, then the principle of sufficient reason, which says that like all effects need an explanation in terms of a cause, which would be false.
Does the whole married bachelor thing fall into this?
Well, this is like analytic truth. It's like, you know, something that's true by definition, like that, like it's kind of separate from PSR, right? Because like you can have those types of facts and still have brute facts, etc., right? It's just like the necessity relation kind of stops at God. And then God is just necessary without an explanation, you know? There's no cause to him.
Well, I find that if God is the answer for everything,
the uncaused cause.
No answer. Well, he's also there's no. So if he's the answer for everything, then there's
it's kind of like this idea. It's like, do you think an object can explain itself? It's kind of weird, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Like, do I explain myself? No, it seems like I'm explained by this causal history that my parents, etc., you know, those things explain those facts.
But that's how you get out of the infinite regress, right?
Yeah, but you can almost break down any subject and think you can always kill a conversation at least, or kill a thought, because with the infinite regress shit, because then we both just stop at, because you'll hear me say, well, scientists say they don't know what happened, and not knowing is not necessarily a position.
No, if you say that everything that begins to exist has a cause, right? Then it's going to be something that exists that doesn't have a cause, or something that began to exist that doesn't have a cause, right? You got to stop. They got to be some starting point.
No, see that's.
If you have infinite regress, there was never the starting point.
See, like that's like a very common mistake, kind of, that people make too, right? Like another thing I could just say if someone says to me, like, you know, every single thing has a cause, right? Every single effect has a cause that like fully explains it, sufficiently explains it. I could just say something like, okay, absolutely, right? Every effect has a cause going back ad infinitum, right? So it's like there is no effect in the chain, right, of like cause and effect. There's no effect that doesn't have a cause, right? Because it's an infinite chain back. There is no starting point, right? So therefore, there's no need for like a first effect that doesn't have a cause, right? So I can just like accept the PSR and then just say like, well, you know, time stretches infinitely in the past, right? For the universe, the multiverse, or whatever.
Yeah,
and that's
we
another
do
way
have a
to get around
time.
the
when we say there was a beginning for our expansion of our universe, right? There is a beginning. There was.
Yeah.
That's what we
That's
say.
right. Yeah.
You're saying there isn't a
Wait, what do
beginning.
you mean? Wait, what did you say, Bill? You said it's right that we have a beginning in our universe or something?
Yeah, like I think the scientific evidence, right? Like the commonly adopted, understood scientific evidence is that like our universe started 14 point something billion years ago.